What would you do if, alone in the forest, you suddenly heard a baby crying where no child could possibly be? In the fall of 1997, deep in North Carolina's Pisgah woods, Marian Holt, a wildlife filmmaker grieving the loss of her own child, heard that exact sound. But the truth is, it wasn't a human cry. It was warped. Right but wrong. And it led her to break her own professional code. She set a trap near the creek, hoping to document whatever was out there. That night, a small brown-furred creature walked into it. Seconds later, something massive emerged. 8 feet tall, black fur, glowing amber eyes. It snapped the steel frame like paper, freed the youngling, and stared at Marian with terrifying clarity. One word: leave. From that moment, the forest changed. Her camp dismantled, neatly, deliberately. Her belongings lined up like a path out of the woods, branches skewered into the ground like warning stakes. And then came the cry again. But this time, it whispered her name. Lost in a growing maze of fog and memory, Marian clung to one truth: leave warmth, not wounds. She left behind a wool scarf she once knit for her daughter, and a pot of chicken soup, her offering to the unknown. By dawn, the scarf hung high in a tree. At its base, 2 fresh hemlock leaves. Later, rescuers found her equipment, her car, and her tapes. One clip showed something shocking. As Marian stumbled near a ravine, a massive hand caught her back, not to harm, but to save. She collapsed in tears, whispering her life's mantra as the camera faded. Her body was found days later. No wounds, no trauma, just wide eyes and 2 hemlock leaves clutched in her hand. To this day, hikers whisper tales of crying children in empty woods, of voices calling their names in the mist. And sometimes, a hot pot of chicken soup appears at the trailhead, left by no one. So remember, if you ever hear a baby crying in a place no child should be, turn back. Some things aren't meant to be proven, only respected. The leaves in Pisgah turned blood red that October, falling soft and steady like forgotten notes in a song too old to hum. Marian Holt adjusted her tripod on the slick bank of Looking Glass Creek, the water catching bits of late sun like threads of broken glass. Behind her, the pines stood tight and silent, as if they too were waiting for something. Her breath came slower now, not from exertion, but from something else. She reached into her jacket pocket, fingers brushing the crumpled paper she hadn't dared to mail. The letter she'd written to her daughter, the one who never lived long enough to hold a crayon. 17 years gone, but Marian still folded it each October like a ritual, tucking it into her coat like a talisman. She adjusted the Hi8 camcorder, ancient but loyal, its tape heads grinding faintly as it captured the quiet shuffle of raccoons among the creek rocks. From her pack came the static of the shortwave radio, crackling with no-way updates about incoming wind. Nothing alarming. Not yet. Then it happened. Not loud, not sudden, just wrong. A baby's cry. It didn't carry from any cabin. There were no cabins up here, not within miles. The cry came from upstream, where no trail dared reach, where the woods grew steep and moody. It wailed like a newborn, but held too long, too measured, like someone or something had studied the sound and nearly, but not quite, recreated it. The breath behind it broke unevenly, the rhythm jarring, like a record spinning a beat too slow. Marian froze, fingers clenching the edge of the tripod. Her ears, trained after years in wildlife audio, strained toward it. This wasn't bobcat, wasn't bear, wasn't wind. It rose again, a note off pitch, like a sob underwater. The camera caught her face in profile as she turned. The whites of her eyes glinted in the fading light. She stood there for what felt like minutes, unmoving. The wind shifted, The leaves above whispered something unrepeatable. She didn't remember unclipping the tripod. Only the cold weight of the camera in her hands as she backed up, each step slow, deliberate. The creek gurgled on, oblivious. Later, in her cabin, Marian sat curled on the edge of her cot, the fire low and the letter unfolded on her lap. She didn't cry. She rarely did anymore. Instead, her eyes settled on the cage trap sitting beneath the window, old, rust-stained, built for foxes or injured deer. She'd brought it up last spring for a wildlife rescue segment, but never used it. She stared at it for a long time, then reached for her field journal, thumb trembling just a little as she pressed pen to paper. "If the crying returns tomorrow," she wrote, "I'll try the trap." No signature, no second thoughts. Just that single line, and the wind moaned once more beyond the glass, low and slow and not quite wind at all. The apples looked wrong against the forest floor. Too red, too deliberate. Marian knelt beside the old trap, her breath a soft cloud in the chill of early dusk. She laid the last apple down, its skin mottled like dried blood, and glanced up at the creek just 20 feet away. The current was louder tonight, frothy and nervous. She set the high 8 in place, its red light blinking low through the brush, just enough to keep from alerting anything too curious. A nest of branches covered the lens, camouflaged like the blind she used in elk season. She'd done this 100 times, baiting for foxes, raccoons, even the occasional coyote. But this wasn't about wildlife anymore. Not really. The air sat heavier than usual. Her fingers felt stiff even in gloves, her knees aching from where she'd crouched too long on the mossy slope. The sun was nearly gone, bleeding orange into the mist that crept through the pines like breath from something sleeping just out of sight. She pulled her coat tighter, then stepped back behind the rock outcropping, just far enough to watch. The forest did not wait long. The sound came again. That baby cry shape-shifted into something crueler now, wetter, thinner, like a dying whistle trying to remember what a lullaby sounded like. It floated through the trees with surgical precision, threading straight toward her trap. And then it stopped. Marian held her breath. From the bend in the creek, something moved, something small. It wasn't a raccoon. It shuffled forward on 2 feet, not 4, too narrow for a bear cub, too fluid to be anything else she knew. Its limbs were long, but awkward, covered in a mess of brown fur slicked by creek water. The creature tilted its head like it had only recently learned how. Its eyes caught the last beam of light like marbles soaked in tears. It stared at the apple. Then it stepped into the trap. The metal snapped. The door crashed down. The cry that came wasn't human, but it wanted to be. Marian stumbled forward without thinking. Her heart slammed hard into her ribs, her boots kicking up wet leaves. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not to the camera, not to the trees, but to that small thing inside the rusted cage who now shook like a branch in hard wind. She dropped to her knees. Her hands trembled as they reached forward, then stopped mid-air. It was just a baby, or looked like one. Its chest rose and fell too fast, its fingers clawing the base of the trap, small but not animal. She felt something twist in her gut. The same hollowness that used to bloom in the sterile white halls of neonatal ICU rooms. She pressed a hand to her sternum, where her daughter's weight had once rested for 7 short hours, 17 years ago. There was nothing there now, just bones and memory and a pulse too loud in her ears. The camcorder kept recording, unshaking. Then the trees behind her shifted. Not rustled, shifted. Marian turned and saw it. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Not hulking, just inevitable. Covered in deep fur that caught what little dusk remained like smoke over dark water. Its face wasn't human, but it wasn't beast. Its shoulders moved with intelligence. Its eyes, amber and alive, locked on her, unblinking. She couldn't move. Not from fear, from awe. The thing didn't roar, didn't lunge. It spoke. Just one word. Leave. The sound hit her like pressure in a plane cabin, the syllable pressed low and thick, distorted by throat or instinct or something older than language. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. She nodded without realizing it. The creature stepped forward, one hand hanging beside its thigh, the fingers half curled like it was used to grabbing, pulling, breaking. But it didn't raise them. It looked past her, to the trap, then back at her. She didn't understand what it was trying to say, but she felt it. She rose slowly, backing away from the trap, from the baby still curled inside, whimpering in a sound so close to her daughter's final breath that Marian almost fell to the ground again. She turned to the camera, eyes wild, mouth ajar, and then stopped. She didn't dare shut it off, because this wasn't a story anyone would believe. Not without proof. Not even herself. She vanished into the trees just as the bigger one reached the trap, and her hands would not stop shaking, and her ears would not stop echoing with the sound of that one impossible word. Behind her, the high 8 recorded the creak of bending metal. Not a violent tear, but a careful one. Old hinges moaned. The door creaked, and then silence, except for the sound of something huge, walking on 2 feet, slowly fading into the woods. And somewhere near her, just out of sight, she could swear she heard her own breath echoed back to her. Not by herself. A rasp, a mimic, just a beat too slow. Like a ghost learning to breathe again. She didn't look back. She just ran. The cage groaned like it remembered its younger strength. Iron bent slow and reluctant, creaking at the corners where rust had been gnawing for decades. The being, gripped the top bar of the trap and pulled it outward, not with brute rage, but with a kind of solemn effort, like it knew exactly where the hinges had softened from time and water. Marian watched from behind a collapsed pine trunk, her palms pressed into the wet soil, her camera lens just barely exposed through a web of moss and needles. The creature didn't snarl, didn't look around like it feared being seen. It just worked. One hand braced the base of the trap, the other curled slow around the door, testing it, flexing once, twice. The third time, the bar gave way with a sharp pop and a long metallic sigh, swinging open like the rib cage of something long dead. The little one inside didn't bolt. It waited, shivering, then reached forward with one long arm to touch the larger one's forearm. A nudge, a reassurance. Then they vanished behind the birch trees without a sound. Marian didn't move. The earth was cold beneath her. Wet leaves stuck to her elbows. Her knees were caked with creek silt. She should have run, should have shut the camera off and scrambled uphill and never come back. But something in her lungs refused to obey. Her ribs felt too tight. Her eyes burned. They hadn't harmed her. The bigger one, whatever it was, had looked directly into the lens. It had seen the camera, seen her, and hadn't stopped, hadn't hidden, hadn't tried to end anything. Instead, it had looked into that red blinking eye like it meant to leave a mark. Not a threat. A message. She replayed it in her mind as she lay there. The moment the eyes met hers. No animalistic flare. No hunger. Just something that held her still, that pulled her back into a memory she didn't want. A hospital room lit by low fluorescence. Her baby's chest moving shallow and panicked. The same kind of chest rise she'd seen in the little one, moments before the trap door came down. She realized her fingers were still gripping the high 8. Its casing dug into her palm. She loosened her grip, heart pounding again. Still, they hadn't come for her. Not to kill, not to silence. She crawled backward like a soldier avoiding sniper fire, eyes never leaving the path where they had gone. Branches swung lightly, not broken, just parted. It was deliberate, precise. She backed all the way to the creek's bend before standing. Mud streaked down her legs, her breathing loud in her own ears. But not the loudest. There was something behind her. Slow, heavy, measured. She spun. Nothing. Only trees. She stepped backward once, then again. Another step followed hers. Same weight, same rhythm. She turned again, still empty. But the sound was there. Too big to be a deer, too balanced to be a bear. And then it happened. A breath. Right behind her. Her own, copied. Too perfect. Except it wasn't hers. Not this time. It rasped softly, then stopped, as if waiting to see what she'd do with it. Marian didn't scream. That instinct had died years ago in sterile grief. She just ran. But even then, she ran quiet. Downhill, over wet roots, boots sliding through slick patches of moss, her shoulder slamming once into a low branch, camera still clutched against her chest. She didn't stop to check if it was recording. Didn't dare. And that sound kept following her. Not sprinting, not chasing, mirroring. One step behind, one breath behind. Always the same. When she reached the slope where the creek crossed back over a natural bridge of boulders, she dropped into the mud beside a log and pressed herself against the underside of the hill. There she waited, chest heaving, ears straining for footsteps or voice, or that rasped mimicry that made her skin crawl worse than any growl. But it didn't come, only silence. Thick, stretching, after minutes, maybe more. She stood, shakily, and began the hike back toward camp. The trees didn't feel the same anymore. The path she had followed earlier was still there, but narrower somehow, like it had tried to forget her already. When she reached the clearing, her camp was just as she'd left it. The tarp still flapped lightly over her cot, the cooler untouched, the fire pit cold. But the trap, now twisted and empty, sat in the exact same place as before. She stepped toward it, and something beneath her boot cracked. She looked down. A rock, pale gray. Nothing strange, except it hadn't been there earlier. Not near her fire circle, not in that exact shape. It was smooth on one side, weather-worn, but the other side had a smear of red. Not blood, apple. And there, etched faintly across the top, 3 parallel lines. Not scratches, not random. Intentional. Like a tally, like a mark. She didn't know what it meant. She set the rock gently on the stump beside the trap, then turned slowly toward the edge of camp. The camera battery was low now, 1 bar blinking. She raised it and filmed anyway, because maybe this was the only way to stay honest. The last light fell through the trees, brushing against her face. Her hair stuck to her forehead in damp strands. She didn't wipe it away. Somewhere beyond the creek, something huge moved again. Not toward her, just out there, Marian whispered to the lens. I don't think they want to hurt us, but I think they want us gone. The wind picked up, and the voice returned. Not a roar, not a cry, but her own breath again, looped back at her like someone learning how to be human. By morning, the light was wrong. Marian stepped out of the tent flap with sleep still clinging to her eyes and the taste of creek water in her mouth. But what she saw didn't match the memory of where she'd left things. The cooler had moved, only by inches, but enough to make her stop. She blinked hard and looked again. The corner of her tarp had been folded down, not ripped or dragged, just folded. The tripod she'd packed beside the fire ring was now half turned toward the tree line. Her journal, which she always tucked under the left corner of her cot, lay neatly closed on the cooler lid. It hadn't been opened, but it had been touched. Her breath went shallow. She scanned the edge of camp. No broken branches, no signs of fight or panic. It didn't feel like a raccoon, didn't feel like mischief. This felt like intention. She moved slowly, listening for anything out of place. The kind of silence that hums when you're being watched. Every part of the forest held still, except for the breeze threading through the pine needles. Then she saw the lines, thin sticks, maybe 10 of them, all broken to the same length and planted in the dirt at the northern edge of camp. Each stood upright like a tiny fence post, sunk deep enough to stay standing through the night's wind. They weren't bent. They weren't scattered. They made a curve, deliberate, elegant, and pointed toward the creek trail. Not in, out. Marian knelt by them, heart ticking faster than she wanted. She touched one of the sticks. It moved slightly, pliable. Green inside, fresh, not deadfall. She stood up and turned back toward the fire pit, and that's when she saw the footprints. The first one was beside the tripod, clearer than any boot, deep, toes wide-spaced, the heels sunk a full inch deeper than the front, easily 16 inches long, not distorted like bear, no claw drag, no slop of weight shifting side to side like a quadruped. This was balanced, heavy, upright. She followed the prints slowly. There were 5 in all. They moved through her camp like someone pacing, calmly. Then they turned, directly toward the ridge where her old topo map had marked the creek bend. She unfolded the map again on a tree stump, tracing the red trail she'd walked 100 times. But something was off. The lines on paper no longer matched the forest. The boulder field that used to sit below the ridge. Gone or shifted. The forked ash tree she'd used as a marker snapped at the trunk, not by wind, but by clean force. And the side trail she'd used for years, a soft deer path sloping back toward the ranger road, was now blocked by a half-dozen stones the size of her torso, damp with fresh moss and dusted with pine needles that hadn't had time to settle naturally. She circled one of the stones, knelt down, and found scrape marks on the underside. Dragged. Moved. By what? She whispered the question aloud before realizing she'd said it at all. The forest didn't answer. She packed up in silence. Her hands moved slower now, methodical. Not fear, not yet. Just awareness. Like the heat you feel before thunder. She zipped the tent, but left it standing. Something in her resisted collapsing it all the way, as if leaving it there, half open, was a kind of offering. A way to say, I see the line. I won't push. The last thing she did was check the camera. The battery was nearly dead, but it had kept running after she fled. A red dot blinked low. She rewound a few minutes, crouched beneath a branch, and watched. The tall figure came back into frame from the left. Not stomping, walking. It knelt beside the trap, reached one arm in, not to the young one, but to the hinge Marian had bent years ago with pliers when resetting it for a fox rescue. The latch gave way under the pressure of one palm. It waited as the smaller one crawled out. Then it stood, and for 5 full seconds, it looked directly into the lens. Not through it, into it. Then it turned toward the forest and vanished behind the trees. No growl, no hiss, no chase. Just presence. Marian sat back on her heels. Her fingers gripped the viewfinder tighter than they needed to. She wanted to speak. She didn't. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her recorder, the one she kept for field notes. Her voice cracked as she pressed the record button. I was wrong, she said. They don't want to be found. I think they're setting lines. They move things with care. They put things back where they don't belong, but only slightly. I think they're trying to show me what boundaries mean, on their terms. She swallowed. I'm leaving this place now. If anyone finds this recording, or my tent, or whatever comes next, don't follow. Don't try to push farther. She stopped the tape. Then the wind changed, and someone called her name. Not a yell, not an echo. A voice, low, rasped, strained through something that didn't belong to human lungs. Marian, 3 syllables, stretched and cracked like old wood. She didn't move, couldn't. She scanned the trees. The mist had thickened now, rolling in from the lower ravine. No shape, no motion. Just that name, her name, repeated once, then nothing. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the trail, faster than she meant to. The leaves underfoot muffled her steps, but she could hear her own breath rising too fast. The path curved where it shouldn't. The ridge dipped where it used to rise. She pulled the map again, checked the ink. It didn't help. The trail was gone. In its place, a floor of thick red leaves and moss, and silence so deep it felt carved. She turned back, looking for the line of sticks. Gone. No markers, just the echo of her name, fading into pine. Marian lit the fire slowly that night, stacking the kindling with the same care she'd once used to dress a newborn in winter. Each piece laid gently on the others, as though sudden movement might crack the silence between the trees. Her fingers trembled even in the warmth of her gloves. The sun had gone 2 hours ago. The cold now came not only from the air, but from the way the woods had shifted. She felt it more than she saw it. A quiet repositioning of boundaries, like the forest itself had taken a step forward. She poured chicken soup from her thermos into a metal cup and held it close to her face. The steam curled upward, a brief comfort against her cheek. Somewhere in the dark beyond the firelight, leaves rustled without wind. Not many. Just one place. Just once. She didn't turn. She'd learned that by now. Whatever watched her didn't need to be seen. It chose when to be seen. It had a rhythm, a presence. She raised the cup to her lips and drank. The heat burned her tongue, but she didn't stop. Tonight wasn't about safety. It was about acknowledgement. She looked down at her lap. In her hands, folded in a soft square, was the scarf she'd knitted years ago for her daughter. Pale blue, frayed on the ends. The wool still smelled faintly of cedar, stored in the drawer where she kept baby teeth and postcards she never sent. Marian hadn't touched the scarf in over a decade. But tonight, something in her chest cracked open, not from fear, from recognition. She stood slowly and walked to the closest pine. Her boots made almost no sound on the moss. She reached up and tied the scarf to a low branch, carefully, deliberately, letting it hang with a gentle sway, like a prayer caught halfway in the air. Then she whispered, not knowing if it would reach anything at all, "I'm sorry." The woods didn't answer, but they heard. She sat back by the fire, wrapped herself in her coat, and stared into the flames. Hours passed like mist. The soup cup cooled beside her boot. The shadows grew longer, then thinner, then sharper, until finally they gathered into one shape at the edge of the firelight. She didn't flinch. The large figure stood just outside the ring of orange, barely lit. Smoke rose between them. It didn't move closer, didn't growl or speak, just stood there, still as the trunks behind it, watching. Its breath was visible in the cold, slow, calm. Marian looked back at it, her eyes rimmed red from smoke and sleeplessness. She didn't blink. The scarf moved slightly in the breeze above them. The figure made no sound, but she felt something shift. Something invisible passed between them, the way grief sometimes does in a room where no one speaks, but everyone knows what's been lost. She didn't reach for the camera, didn't take a note. She knew now that some things didn't belong on tape. It stood for another minute, maybe more. Then it stepped backward and vanished into the dark. She didn't sleep that night. Just sat by the fading coals, knees drawn to her chest, the fire hissing its slow goodbye. When dawn came, the cold was sharper. She stood slowly and stretched her back, bones aching, body brittle from stillness. Then she saw it. The scarf was gone. Not torn, not dropped. It had been retied, high up, far too high for her to reach. At least 12 feet up the tree, hung carefully from a branch that hadn't been bent or broken. Dry, clean, the knot secure. It hadn't fallen or been tossed. It had been placed, and beneath it, on the damp soil, lay 2 fresh hemlock leaves. Green, unbruised, laid side by side like small hands. She knelt without thinking, fingertips hovering just above them. No boot prints, no scratches, no sound, only the soft, pressing stillness that made her breath catch in her throat. Her fingers closed around the leaves, slowly, gently, as if taking a gift from something ancient. And then she heard it. The crying, but this time it had changed. It didn't sound like a baby anymore. It sounded like memory, like breath caught in the throat of a mother who's said goodbye too many times. A hollow ache behind each note, every gasp shaped like loss. The cadence was too close, too real. The way the chest wheezed between cries, it matched exactly what she'd held that final hour in the hospital, when machines could do no more, and all that remained was the rise and fall of a small, failing chest. Marian's hands trembled. She stood, eyes wet, lips parted, and she whispered toward the sound. "I'm here." The crying paused, just for a second, then returned, softer, slower, as if listening. The wind shifted through the trees. Smoke drifted sideways. Her breath clouded the air in front of her like frost on glass. She didn't know if she imagined it, but she thought she saw something tall standing between the trees again, just beyond where the scarf had once hung. Not moving, not waiting, just present, watching her the way a sentry watches a fence line. She didn't approach. She didn't run. She simply picked up the cup of soup, still warm at the bottom, and set it gently on the flat rock near the trail. The one she'd passed the day she arrived, the one that somehow always stayed clean despite the leaves. Then she stepped back and waited. She thought about boundaries, not fences, not rules, but gestures, like hanging something precious, like answering a cry, like leaving warmth in the dark for someone who's been cold too long. The wind died. The sound faded, but not into silence, into something else, into breath. Slow, mirrored, familiar. It came from the same direction, deep, low. A quiet exhale that echoed hers, one beat behind, and then a voice. Not loud, not sharp, just close enough to carry. "Home, leave." The syllables cracked like old bark, but the meaning was clear. Not a command, not a threat, a warning. Marian nodded slowly. She turned her eyes toward the trail, and the scarf above her swayed gently, like a hand waving goodbye. The ground gave way beneath her like a trap she'd forgotten to check. One wrong step on the slope above Looking Glass Creek, where the frost hadn't yet melted beneath the layer of decaying pine needles. The edge collapsed without sound. Marian's boot slid, her knee struck rock, and gravity pulled her sideways into the open. She didn't scream. There wasn't time. Only the rush of cold air in her ears and the sharp thud of her shoulder against the bank. Her camera bag flipped open in the fall. The .8 tumbled out, bounced once, then landed hard against a patch of bare ground and tilted back, lens to the sky. It kept recording. She didn't see that. She was on her back, eyes blinking at a canopy of brown branches and bruised clouds. Her breath knocked loose from her chest like a kicked door. Her elbow throbbed. Blood slicked her palm from the scrape against gravel. But she was conscious. That much she could confirm. And then pain whispered through her ribs. Not broken, not cracked, but bruised deep, the kind that lingers longer than it should. She tried to sit, failed, waited, tried again, this time slower. Her hands found moss and damp root, fingers digging in as if pulling herself back from a different place entirely. The air smelled like wet stone and riverweed. The cold stung her lungs, but something else caught her attention before she could move again. A presence behind her, not close, but close enough to feel. She didn't look, not yet. There was weight in the stillness, the kind that bends sound, reshapes air. She stayed frozen, one palm pressed to the forest floor, the other clutching her side, breath shallow. Every part of her body screamed for her to flee, but something deeper, something quieter, told her to wait. A shadow passed at the edge of her vision. Not fast, not threatening, just there, and then a sound, soft. A single footstep, not crunching but placing. Then nothing. Then another, and another. Then silence. She turned her head, just a little, enough to catch motion through the crooked trees above. A shape, tall, dark, slow, stepping into the brush without a backward glance. Not vanishing, not running, just leaving. She lay there for minutes after, the sound of her blood in her ears louder than the creek. Her breathing came in waves. Not panic, not peace, survival. When she finally pushed herself upright, dirt stuck to the blood on her elbow. Her fingers were shaking, but she didn't drop the recorder. She clutched it against her chest like it might answer something if held tight enough. Then she noticed the camera, the .8, halfway embedded in mud. Lens aimed toward where she'd fallen. She crawled toward it, wincing with every shift of her ribs. The screen was cracked, but the red light still blinked. The battery icon flashed once, then faded. She hit rewind with the corner of her thumb. The tape spun back, whirring low. She watched. The lens had caught her fall, a blur of motion and sound. A glimpse of her coat, then the sky. And then, a figure stepped into frame, not directly. From behind, partially obscured by ferns, one long arm stretched out, thick as a tree limb, ending in a wide hand. Not clawed, not twisted. A hand. It reached low as her body slid. It didn't grab her, didn't lift, but it caught her, just for a moment, just enough to slow her descent. Then it pulled back. She blinked at the image, rewound, played it again, slower. The hand reached out before her back hit the lower bank, touched her side. Not enough to leave a mark, just enough to steer. Her breath caught. She whispered to herself. They helped me. Not followed, not mimicked. Helped. The tape ran to its end, then clicked. She sat with that moment, like it was firelight in the middle of nowhere. The idea that something not human could show care, could watch and wait, and choose not to let her break completely. She shut the camera off. Her knees popped as she stood. She braced her palm against a nearby tree and pulled herself up the rest of the way, biting back a noise in her throat that felt too much like grief. The path wasn't where she remembered it. Again. But she didn't feel lost this time. She just felt redirected. The clouds above thinned, and for a moment a single beam of light broke through the canopy and landed on the rock where she'd nearly cracked her spine. A sliver of warmth. A warning. A gift. She walked slowly now, measured steps. No sound but her boots on the soaked trail and the distant whisper of water. As she moved, she whispered one line aloud. To no one in particular, or maybe to all the unseen things that had watched her, breathed her breath, copied her pain. Leave warmth behind, she said. Then her voice broke just slightly. Not wounds. She didn't know why she said it, but the wind moved like it had heard. She hiked until the sun dropped behind the ridge again. Her body ached, her back stung, but the pain was hers, and she carried it like a woman who understood now that boundaries didn't always mean isolation. Sometimes they meant mercy. The fire that night was harder to start. Her fingers kept slipping, but eventually it caught. The flames rose, and with them, the steam from the last of her soup. She sat back on the log she'd used since her first night, eyes scanning the dark beyond the ring of firelight. Nothing moved, but that didn't mean nothing was there. She didn't feel afraid anymore. She just felt seen. And for the first time since she arrived, Marian Holt didn't reach for her camera. She didn't record. She didn't narrate. She just sat there, her breath fogging the air in front of her, and watched the shadows shift without judgment. And somewhere, just barely beyond the hiss of wood turning to coal, she thought she heard it again. Not a cry, not a word, just breath, one beat after hers. Still there, still listening. The truck was still there when they found it. Half covered in leaves, driver's door locked, passenger window fogged from the inside like someone had sat too long without breathing. Tessa wiped the glass with the sleeve of her flannel. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no one inside. The sun was already leaning westward by the time they reached the trailhead. Wade parked close to the tree line and killed the engine, but neither of them moved at first. The woods looked different now. Not wilder, just watchful. They'd tried Marian's radio all morning. No response. The last call came 2 nights ago, fragmented, her voice garbled between static and wind. Something about a scarf, a cry, then silence. Everett had warned them, half joking not to get involved. Let the ghosts keep their woods, he'd said. They don't like flashlights. But Wade had known Marian since she was 19 and stubborn. She wasn't careless. If she'd stopped responding, something had shifted. And now, standing here with the chill pressing down through the canopy, that shift felt permanent. Tessa unzipped her coat and reached into the pack. 3 camcorder tapes, one in a cracked plastic case, 2 rubber banded together, marked with dates. October 15th, 16th. She hadn't watched them yet. Not all the way. But she'd seen enough. The first tape was shaky. Mostly shots of raccoons near a stream. Then the trap, clearly baited. A flash of movement. A cry. And then a form, small, brown, stepping forward on 2 legs. The camera kept rolling. The trap slammed shut. Tessa paused it there the first time, palms sweating. The second tape picked up later. Night, low light. A larger figure emerged, bent the trap open like tin foil. No aggression, no fear, just precision. And one word, leave. Clear enough to make her stomach turn. The third tape, the last one Marian had labeled, was shorter. A blur of ground, then sky. Her own breathing. Leaves. Then a shape passing behind her. Tall, almost graceful. And a massive hand, catching her back just as her body fell out of frame. The tape ended on silence. They followed the flagged trail up the creek bend. The markers had faded since last year. The forest swallowed things quickly in Pisgah. Branches leaned in like arms braced against memory. Ferns curled tighter. The ground was soft. Too soft in places. Once, Tessa slipped and Wade caught her wrist before she dropped. "Wait," he said. He knelt, brushing wet leaves aside. 2 hemlock leaves, fresh, laid side by side. No branch nearby, no tree overhead. They looked placed. Tessa stepped back. Wade didn't say a word. Farther up, they found the remnants of camp. The tarp was gone. The fire pit buried in ash. But someone had sat here. Recently. The logs were dry. One had a thread of scarf still tied around the end. Blue, faded, frayed at the tips. Tessa picked it up like it was something sacred. Her breath caught. She remembered Marian showing her that scarf once, years ago, over coffee and old Polaroids. Knitted it while waiting on test results, she'd said. Didn't finish it until long after. She let the scarf go. They moved toward the creek, staying close to the left bank. The water was low, running slow but clear. On a flat stretch of river rock, they found it. The body. Marian lay half-curled beside the stream. Her coat zipped halfway, one hand across her chest, the other reaching toward the water like she'd tried to touch it before the end. Her eyes were open, but not afraid. There were no signs of a struggle, no bruises, no claw marks or impact wounds. Just stillness. A final breath taken gently. In her hand, 2 fresh hemlock leaves. Unbroken, damp with morning mist. Wade dropped to one knee, lips parting, then closing again. Tessa crouched beside him, touched Marian's forehead with the back of her fingers. Cold, but peaceful. There was something quiet around her. Something weighty but not cruel. It felt like standing in the center of a chapel where no one prayed anymore, but everyone remembered how. The medical examiner would call it inconclusive. Maybe exposure, maybe shock. A sudden heart event. They'd list the possibilities in a column, none fully satisfying. But Everett, when he finally heard, would say only one thing. She crossed into borrowed land. He'd explain, between coffee sips and long silences, the old stories. The ones passed around under hunting cabins and ranger stations when the fire got low and the beer ran out. The K-110, the borrowed name ones. The stories said they echoed the voices of people already half lost. Called them deeper into woods that didn't want them. Mimicked grief. Echoed pain. Not to mock, but to reflect it. He'd never say they were evil. Just protective. Just old. Back at the site, Wade and Tessa gathered what they could. The camera. The tapes. Marian's notebook, slightly damp. Pages curled like fallen petals. Inside the last entry, I think they don't understand why we film, but they understand mercy. I don't think they meant for me to stay, but they didn't let me fall alone. Tessa closed the journal and pressed it to her chest. They wrapped Marian in the emergency blanket from Wade's pack. They didn't move her yet, not until the others came. But before they turned to leave the camp, Tessa glanced back toward the ridge. The trees shifted slightly. Not wind, not bird. Something taller, just a flicker of movement. Far enough not to frighten, close enough to witness. They left the scarf where it was. Let it hang in the breeze like a signal not to return, but also not to forget. Sometimes it's the wind that tells it first. The way it carries a sound that doesn't belong. A rhythm too hollow, a tone too practiced. Hikers say they've heard it, soft, trailing just behind the breeze. A cry that doesn't belong to anything alive. Or maybe it does, but not here. Not anymore. They say it's a baby's voice. Not every night, just the cold ones. Just when you've gone too far off trail and your feet start to forget where the last gravel ended. That's when it begins. At first, it sounds like distance. Then grief. Then it doesn't sound like anything human at all. And that's when most people turn around. Because there are stories now. Not written, not official. Just passed in low voices by firelight or in ranger shacks where the radios still have dead spots. Stories that you don't laugh off. Not because they're loud, but because they're consistent. They say a woman died out here once. Didn't fall. Didn't freeze. Just stopped. Like the woods asked her to. And she said yes. Her name's still on the old volunteer registry, tucked in a drawer behind the counter at the Pisgah trail station. Marian Holt. Her handwriting neat. The timestamp 4:17 p.m. Signed in, never signed out. They found her days later, hands folded. No wounds, no frostbite. Just a strange quiet wrapped around her body like a blanket no one else could see. Some say she looked peaceful. Others say her eyes were open just wide enough to suggest she saw something no one else ever would. The trail she followed has since shifted, not officially. But everyone knows it. Maps don't match anymore. Stones move. Trees that stood straight for decades now lean with the weight of something invisible. Markers vanish. Campsites relocate. And every now and then someone hears their own name whispered from behind, even though no one else is there. That's when the smart ones stop, or say thank you, or leave a gesture behind. A scarf, a thermos, a handful of warm soup on a flat stone by the creek. And sometimes, only sometimes, it gets taken and returned in a different place. Dry, untouched, higher than any branch should reach. Then there's the sign. It wasn't there before, but now it is. Bolted onto the trailhead's main post, just under the elevation warning. Laminated, weatherproof, no agency logo, just text. If you hear a child crying where no children live, turn around. Some passersby think it's a joke. Some take selfies with it, smirking. They don't usually stay long. But there are others, the ones who pause, who look at the font too carefully, who read the space between the lines, the kind of people who carry their grief in silence, who understand that warnings, when written that plainly, were carved from real things. In the months that followed Marian's passing, hikers reported finding strange arrangements in the woods. Stick figures, not the playful kind. Tall, arched, always facing away from the trail. Some with arms raised, some cradling smaller bundles of moss and hemlock. No rope, no signs of prank. Just there, then gone the next week. Somewhere near the base of a rock ledge, a few miles east of the bend where Marian was found, there's a flat stone with a smooth center. No moss grows on it, no water pools. It stays dry even in storm season. Locals call it the listening rock. They say if you sit long enough in the dusk and don't speak, you might hear something besides wind. Not a voice, not words, but breath. Low, rhythmic, one beat behind your own. A memory of something large watching with patience, not malice. Just watching. People leave things there now. Tiny carved cedar hearts, woven string charms, baby shoes. The offerings stay a few days, then disappear. No one talks about who takes them. But someone, or something, returns others. Leaves, smooth stones, bits of wild yarrow. Always placed gently, never scattered. Then there's the soup. On certain nights, rainy ones especially, rangers have found a warm tin cup set just off the trail. Steam rising, no fire nearby, no footprints. Just a scent that carries farther than it should. chicken, parsley, salt. The kind that reminds you of home even if you never had one. No one claims the cups. No one ever sees them placed. But they keep showing up. And more than once, a camper caught in a storm swears the cup was full. Still hot, still waiting. Some think it's a prank. Some think it's a tribute. But those who've stayed long enough, who've listened close enough, begin to believe the woods are watching. Not in a way that wants you gone, but in a way that wants you to know the rules. Don't chase the voice. Don't bring weapons. Don't record too much. And if you cross the boundary, if you step past where your name no longer belongs, leave something behind. Not just as payment, but as understanding. Because there are places in this world that do not want to be proven. Only remembered. Tessa still visits once a year. She doesn't go deep, just to the clearing. She brings soup in a tin she never reuses. She heats it over a whisper of flame, then places it beside a flat rock and sits for a while. She doesn't speak. She doesn't ask questions. She just listens. Once she swore she heard the scarf move. No wind, no bird, just a soft brush high above. When she turned to look, there was nothing. But the fire crackled differently that night. And when she left, she placed the empty tin upside down on the trailhead marker. When she came back the next year, it was gone. There was only a single hemlock leaf folded in its place. Fresh, green, still wet with morning rain. There are stories that don't end with explanations. They end with echoes, with footprints that vanish just before you look back, with warmth left behind in a place no one claims to know. They drift between what we remember and what we almost believe, refusing to be boxed into truth or fantasy. But somehow, they still live in us, in the way our breath slows in certain woods, in the way a voice in the dark makes us pause. Some stories are not about answers. They are about reverence, about paying attention, about asking nothing and receiving something quiet in return. A gesture, a breath, a warning spoken without anger, a mercy offered without obligation. In our world of proof and pixels, we often forget how to listen, how to respect the space between known and unknown. We demand footage, names, origins, but not everything ancient wants to be proven. Some things, perhaps the most important things, want only to be remembered gently and left unbroken. There are places in this country where silence is not emptiness, it's language. Where the trees are not just trees, but keepers. Where a stone on a trail might be a marker. A stick laid just so might be a boundary. Where the air grows heavier not from fear, but from presence. And where, if you are quiet enough, you might realize something is walking one step behind. Not to harm you, but to see if you'll honor the line. In these places, kindness is not spoken. It's shown. In cups of soup left on cold stones. In scarves returned to higher branches. In hands that catch a fall and disappear before thanks can be given. The kind of kindness that does not need to be seen to be real. The kind that mirrors the best of us when we choose not to destroy what we don't understand. And maybe the lesson is this, that true presence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand the spotlight. It moves like mist between the trees, asking only that we tread with care, that we pause before we take, that we give without needing applause, that we understand the difference between being a guest and being a disturbance. This isn't a story about fear, or monsters, or punishment. It's a story about respect, about letting go, about learning that the unknown isn't always a threat. It's a neighbor that asks only to be left in peace. Because not all doors are meant to be opened. Not all cries are meant to be answered. Some are warnings, some are rituals. Some are simply the sound of something older reminding us it still exists, even when we no longer believe. We are so quick to name, to label, to dissect, but maybe the woods were never asking to be known. Maybe they were asking to be felt, to be remembered, to be left whole. If we can learn to step lightly, to walk humbly, to give without expectation and leave warmth behind, then maybe, just maybe, we'll be remembered too, not as trespassers, but as witnesses who listened, who cared, who turned around when the forest asked. And isn't that the heart of every good story? To leave us changed. To remind us we're not the center of everything. To whisper that something older, quieter, and maybe wiser is still watching and waiting for us to notice it. Thank you for walking this path with us. For listening between the words. For feeling what couldn't be spoken. If this story moved you, if it made you remember something, or even if it just left you with a chill in your spine and a question in your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what lingered, what hurt, what healed. Your voice matters here, and sometimes, when we speak into the quiet speaks back. If you'd like more stories like this, ones that unfold like mist and leave something behind long after the sound fades, make sure you subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because the woods are never truly silent, and some stories don't end. They just step back into the trees, waiting for someone who knows how to listen. So, if you ever find yourself in a quiet stretch of woods, and the air changes, and you feel the hairs on your arms rise for no clear reason, don't run. Don't shout. Just stop. Breathe. Look around. Ask yourself what boundary you might have crossed without realizing. Then listen, not with your ears, with everything else, because some truths come like footsteps behind you. Some kindness arrives in the form of a shadow that doesn't strike, and some warnings sound an awful lot like compassion, whispered in a voice not made for speech. Leave something behind when you go, a gesture, a warmth, a promise that you'll remember, and mean it. Not because someone told you to, but because, once in a while, when you offer reverence instead of conquest, something ancient offers it back. Maybe that's what stories are for. Not to explain, but to pass on what can't be said directly. What only reveals itself when the fire is low, and the wind leans in, and you know deep down that you are not alone, and never were. So thank you, for being the kind of person who listens, for sitting with the strange, for honoring what others ignore. We need more of that in this world. More quiet courage. More people who walk gently. If this story gave you something to hold on to, whether comfort or chills, leave a sign for others. Like a stone on a cairn. Like a hand on a shoulder. Like a comment beneath this video. Let us know you were here. Let us know what stayed with you. And if you want more stories that don't shout, but stay. More tales told not for clicks, but for connection. Subscribe to this channel. Follow us into the next shadow, the next silence, the next story. Because the path doesn't end here. It only disappears like all sacred things into the trees. And if you've learned anything from tonight, you know better than to follow too far. But you'll never forget where it was.